Actually, in fact, Will, I think if you and Brian want to get started now,
Okay.
I think it's a good time.
All right. Hey guys, thanks for coming back. This is the second of the 3-module podcast section of the class, and I have, as promised, Brian Cottington, co-host of the long-running, very successful, and locally produced podcast, The Cinema Psycho Show. And so I have a series of questions for him. As you're listening, if you have questions, you can either chat them in, and Paul will collect those, or if you want to talk to him directly, I'll make sure to leave at least 10 minutes at the end so you can talk with Brian directly. Hi, Brian.
Hey, thanks for thanks for that intro. I don't know if we would be considered quote unquote successful, but long running, yes. But successful usually means like money. And first thing I'll tell your listeners is there's no money in podcasting. But either way, thank you for that intro, and I'm looking forward to your questions and also the questions of the attendees here.
Well, having listened to it, I would say it's successful on its own merit.
Thank you.
And so,
Thank you.
Yeah, aside from any numerical or quantitative judgments of that. So first of all, what is Cinema Psychos?
So the Cinema Psycho Show is a local, it's Pittsburgh-based movie review and / comedy podcast. It's been around since 2016. So it's existed kind of as a weekly podcast that I've produced with two colleagues of mine who we all went to film school together, went to Chatham University's Film and Digital Technology program, and we kind of wanted to just do something that just talked about movies. And for me, I kind of saw the landscape at the time being mostly either podcasts that were run by people who didn't really know what they were talking about in terms of actual film criticism, usually just more or less a comedy podcast talking about movies. But then the other side of that spectrum was very serious, like film spotting is the only one I could think of, where it was very much like, hey, we're just going to spend a very dry hour talking about the pedagogy of, I don't know, Stanley Kubrick, which, hey, more power to you if that's your thing, but I wanted somewhere in the middle. And, that's kind of where the Cinema Psycho Show kind of came about.
So tell me about the other two co-hosts.
Yeah, so my two co-hosts, they're a husband and wife team, John and Elaine Woolscroft, filmmakers in their own right. All three of us were in our grad program together. And I kind of go by the adage that they really are, they bring a lot to the show that I don't think I could do on my own. We have a very good group dynamic, and we play off of each other really well. John is one of the funniest people that I've ever met. I don't know if you've ever met John or not, or if any of the audience has met him or not, but he is literally one of the funniest people you'll ever meet. Lane also is hilarious, and also has a way of kind of balancing out myself, where I kind of come from the analytical side, but also they kind of just complete the circle. And one of the things that we've had when people have listened to it, and you probably have kind of noticed it, is that the podcast itself feels very much like a conversation you would have amongst your friends about a movie. Like after you go see the latest Marvel film, you might converse with your friends and kind of go back and forth about ridiculous things that you might have seen in the movie, which Marvel kind of offers up a lot of that. Yeah,
for me, podcasts about movies or TV shows, they sort of fill that role. I think I recall, if there's a movie review for a film I haven't seen, I'll usually read a paragraph, and then it's like, right. Okay, did he like it? Did he not like it? And if he liked it, then I might see it, and then I want to read anymore. But then I like to read it afterwards, and so I think I've sort of had that dialogue with reviewers in written form. So I kind of feel like, for me and maybe other people, podcasts like yours is filling that niche.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask you a little bit more about that dynamic, but maybe you can play us a sample.
Yeah. So I have a couple samples, because you sent me some questions in advance, so I had some time to get some things together. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I've been doing this podcast, as I said, since 2016. We have currently 184 episodes that we have created. So it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. So I'm sharing my screen. Oh, actually, let me stop sharing. I want to make sure I'm playing my computer audio for that. Computer sound. Okay. All right. So I'll play you just kind of the opener for the newest episode, or our episode on the filmmaking of Neil Breen, who you might not know of. He is a terrible film director. He has made probably 6 different movies. They are questionable in quality, and we have this long-running series. This is the 3rd part of our what we're calling the Breen Apocalypse, and we analyzed his movie I Am Here ... Now. As you kind of guessed, my podcast does skew more towards adult audiences. So if you are a kid, I'm sorry. You may hear some things. I'm going to try to cut it off just so to get to the beginning. But I just always like to put that out there. But here is the first part of that episode, just so you can hear that.
You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
Oh my God, don't stop now!
With your hosts, Brian, John, and Elaine.
Actually, that's the wrong one. Here you go.
Oh, goody, goody, here it comes.
Welcome to the Cinema Psycho Show.
You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
Oh my God, don't stop now!
With your hosts, Brian, John, and Elaine.
Welcome to the Cinema Psycho Show, the madhouse for film freaks and film fans of all types. I'm your host, Brian Cottington, joined by my fellow co-hosts and filmmakers, John and Lane Woolscroft.
I have Breen leftover sugars.
I got the Breen shits. Okay.
I think I need my brain removed.
So you get an idea without getting too much into it. Unless you want to hear more. But I think that's good.
Well, I'm going to ask you to play as that list of questions that I sent you indicates. I'll ask you the films they choose. It's not strictly, the mainstream multiplex there.
You're breaking up, Will, a little bit.
Oh, okay. I'm going to try again. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The question is about the films that you choose to talk about. It's not strictly Hollywood fare.
No, we kind of run the gamut of, we kind of do what's called riding the wave. So if we see that a movie is getting a lot of attention, so I'll give you an example of this. I think it was either last year or the year before, the movie Skyscraper with The Rock came out, and we decided, instead of doing a review of that movie, which would have been very easy to do, that we do a review of a little known movie from 1996 called Skyscraper that stars the late Anna Nicole Smith. It's a bad movie, but it has the same name as The Rock. And what was interesting was that after we put that episode out, we got a lot of traction on that because we were writing kind of that kind of SEO of that name. But we've done everything from Marvel films. We do a Really That Awful, which just kind of looks at movies that most people kind of think are bad. And we ask the question, is it really that bad? One of the first movies we looked at was the 1998 dark comedy Cable Guy. And we asked, okay, is this a bad movie or is it just kind of misunderstood? So we've done kind of all sorts of movies. It's not just B movies, although we do tend to get pigeonholed as horror film reviewers, but we do everything, honestly.
And take us back to when you started it in 2016, or maybe, maybe even had the idea before that.
Yeah.
Did you, this niche that you're talking about, and the approach that you take, was it established early on? Or?
So it's interesting. So for me, I kind of came up with the idea well before 2016. Prior to the Cinema Psycho show, I am a filmmaker, as I think I've mentioned before, and I had a filmmaking partner that I worked with. His name was Johnny Daggers, and he had a studio called Dagger Vision Films. And one of the ideas that we kind of had while we were working, kind of trying to figure out a way that we could generate interest in our work and kind of create an audience, was by doing, at the time, what was called internet radio. It wasn't a podcast per se. It was more or less doing a live recording that would go out, at a preset time, and you could share the link and listen in live from your device. And it kind of predated the podcast craze. I mean, the podcast craze has been around since 2004. But for us, it was really more or less just as an experiment with audio. And it ran for about 100 episodes, more or less. And it got me at least interested in the idea of using audio as a way of generating an audience, which is, for an independent filmmaker, that is probably the hardest thing to do, aside from make the movie, which in itself is a hard task. But getting people to actually be interested in your work, if you don't have, say, a big star in it, or you don't have, millions of dollars in marketing revenue that you can throw at it, that is a difficult task. And so around 2015, I had read an article from Kevin Smith in which he runs Smodcast, which is kind of his podcast network. He had said that, honestly, for filmmakers, they really should look at podcasting as a way of kind of creating that audience. So Cinema Psycho Show was not really supposed to be anything more than something easy to do on the side between movies. And the thing is as it's grown, it's become its own entity, which has devoted a lot of my time, as much as I would to a short film. So kind of from there, I kind of wanted to come up with this concept of kind of combining the best of vulgar comedy that I've seen with some podcasts that have kind of come about, as well as real film criticism, backed by the fact that, myself and my co-hosts all have degrees in this. We've studied it. We make short films, we make films, and kind of bring that all together. So, we kind of started out late 2015. And the episode I have, if you want me to show kind of a little example of it, was on Batman Returns. And it is, you listen to the first part of the most newest episode. That one is really just kind of us trying to find our footing in it. We actually had, when we recorded in my old apartment, my cat knocked over my recorder while I was doing the recording. So we lost the first version of it and had to go back in weeks later and redo it with, now one of my co-hosts is, calling in via Skype. It was not the best compared to what we do now, but that's kind of how it all kind of got started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if we heard, do you still have those early episodes?
Oh yeah, I keep all of them, so I can share that if you want to hear it.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, cool. So share there, and
Actually, in our line, filmmakers John and Elaine Woolscroft. And hey, how's it going?
Heyo.
Doing good.
So this technically is episode 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, number 1.
Yep, we got this.
We got this.
Pilot.
Well, it's the pilot, but actually in our line, we did episode 2 before we did number 1 because I have a cat, and the cat likes to knock over recorders.
It was a quiet desperation and sadness when we realized this awesome show we had done for you guys was like totally jacked. It was so bad.
Yeah,
but she's really a very cute cat, so it was okay.
And on top of that, since this is number 1 and it's gonna be full of bugs, we have John joining us via Skype, which took maybe about an hour.
I mean, we set it up now, so we know what we're doing now. Where the hell are you again, John?
Honestly, I don't even remember. I just drive to these places and I can't recall. It's probably why I probably sound maybe a little bit off here. That, and maybe I just have a grating voice. So if you hear me on other episodes and you also don't like the sound, then you just don't care for the sound of my voice.
So yeah, you get an idea there.
Yeah. Mhm. I'm getting the sense that even early on, you're sort of establishing territory or kind of character, basically. So like when I hear it's a voice or something like that, but I feel like you're the foundation of the show, and and then we have, you know, like Brian, John is kind of deadpan, and I can clearly see what you're talking about. That he's really
he was
funny,
deadpan then. He's not deadpan now. Yeah, no, he's not deadpan now. That's his humor. He can go deadpan, but honestly, that's not him at all currently. Like, I think back then it was just a matter of we were really trying to find our footing. As you said, we do kind of end up becoming the characters. You know, more or less, which I never imagined that we would. You know, what's interesting is like I've met people outside of podcasting, you know, my professional life. You know, I teach as well and work at a university. And what's interesting about it is when they ask, "Oh, how's your podcast?" I'm like, you know, I got a podcast, and then they ask for it, and I have to tell them, "Listen, I want you to understand that this is not Brian now. This is Brian outside of what you know me in my professional circles. So just keep that with a grain of salt." You know, it is a character. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah. I'm learning something each time I've taught a podcasting class. You know, typically I'll ask, you know, people, you know, what are you listening to? What's your favorite kind of thing? And I do that because really podcasts mean different things to different people. Mm-hmm. And so, and I've had this same experience each time. Like in this class last week, someone suggested ear biscuits, and so I listened to it. And fortunately, I was driving to Greensburg at the time, which meant that I had to, like, I had some time basically. Yeah. And so I listened to one episode and a second, and you know, my first reaction is that this guy is just, you know, shooting the shit basically, and I really didn't get it. And then you sort of kind of they get into a rhythm. I start to distinguish between voices. And you can tell that, you know, if you start spending time with people, they just get really comfortable. And then the main thing I think is that the humor comes out. It's not so much the jokes. It's like someone says something and it's like, yeah, that's what he would say, or that's how he would react to, you know, in this case, a movie.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting. I taught my first podcasting course in the spring for Chatham University. It was the first of its kind. And one of the things that you know, I told my students was that I never got into podcasting, and I never listened to a podcast until I actually created one myself. And now I listen to them all the time. It's one of those things that once you kind of experiment with it and kind of experiment with playing with audio, you want to reach out to what else is out there and kind of take in what everyone else has done. So, you know, I listen to podcasts by Libsyn called The Feed constantly because, you know, I want to see what's going on in the podcast space and apply that stuff to my own show. But I would have never discovered that show if I had not gone in and actually created my own content.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like you're part of a, I don't know, like a movement or like a community?
Yes and no. So podcasting is, I would say, built on its ability to be intimate. So it's not quite kind of like, you know, a film set, for instance, where a film set, you know, is, you know, it's a communal activity. You know, you even though you are on a crew and even though you have your own job, there is a communal aspect to filmmaking. Podcasting really isn't like that. Podcasting, you might have a communal aspect within your individual like show. But I mean, for me, I really didn't see the communal side of it until I joined the Epicast Network years back when we first started and started kind of interacting with other podcasts within the city, and then realized that, oh God, yeah, there really is a community, but that's just kind of centralized to just Pittsburgh. In terms of the larger space, I mean, there are groups on Facebook and that kind of are podcast groups, more or less. But in terms of kind of like the big, larger issues, like for instance, Joe Rogan getting picked up by Spotify for bajillions of dollars. That doesn't really apply to me. I'm a small time podcaster. I'm not making any money off of this. This is really just something to do to keep me sane creatively. But those kind of larger issues that I think the podcast space is really experiencing now, they're not going to really affect the independent podcaster more or less as it will the larger podcaster. But the one thing I will say it will do is kind of push the independent podcaster in terms of quality. One of the things now that you kind of have to do is really pay attention to the quality of your content, the quality of your sound. You can't really just use a cell phone anymore. That used to be what you could get away with, and I don't think you can anymore. Not when the competition is spending a lot of money on the quality of their content.
Let's talk about production. Okay?
Sure.
And I kind of want to just sort of hand this over to you because there's probably aspects of it as far as your setup, the time it takes, to plan and to record a show, et cetera, like that. So just kind of give me, from start to finish, like the production of one episode.
So when we first started, we really didn't have any set plan in terms of what our content was going to be. A lot of times we would, like the week before, say, hey, this movie is coming out this week. Let's all go and watch it at our own different times, whenever we could, and, come back the week later and start recording. Since we've grown and since we've put in more episodes, and honestly, since just life happens, for me, when I first started this podcast, I wasn't married. I lived by myself with a cat, as he kind of referenced in the first episode clip there. I didn't have kids. So, a lot has changed in the 5 years. And one of the things that I think we've all had to do in our show is really adapt to, just the stuff outside of podcasting to make it so that we can still produce the show. Because we all kind of agreed we really want to do this no matter what. So now John kind of takes control of planning of our episodes. He actually does a fantastic job. He plans out a year in advance. Like, we'll literally know what our episodes are going to be in December, in January. And that's just because he really researches, he'll go in and we've kind of broken out, as I mentioned, kind of our episodes to standard reviews, interviews, which will bring in filmmakers a lot of times, and kind of talk to them about their work. Really That Awful, which is kind of our, look at movies that maybe were bad, that's most people think are bad, but really aren't. Our pantheon of other shit, which is our bad movie reviews. That's what we've titled them as. And then our filmmaker retrospectives, which those tend to be longer episodes, but we really look at a filmmaker's entire scope of work. The last one we did, I think, the one's coming up, I think, is going to be on John Carpenter. So we looked at an entire work of John Carpenter. So he'll plan those out. We'll then decide on a date that we're going to do batch recording. So we used to, and this really just kind of came about from myself having a daughter 2 years ago, was decide not to do week by week recording. So what we tend to do now is we'll batch record. So we'll record maybe 3 or 4 episodes on a weekend and then release them out in according to our schedule. That's worked out pretty well. That's actually how we've been able to handle with the pandemic, is batch recording and then releasing them out over the course of the summer. So we'll record now. Prior to the pandemic, prior to March, we actually did record in person. So I would bring in equipment. I own equipment. I own microphones. I use a little 4-track Tascam DR70 recorder. I don't record into the computer. That's mainly because of the fact, I know, Will, you mentioned you were having computer problems earlier, and that's the reason why I don't record directly into a computer. I generally record into a digital recorder that can separate all of our sources. I'll bring that in to Adobe Audition, where I will be the one to edit it down, put in our theme music that I've already made, as well as any additional elements. If we have an interview from someone, we'll throw that in there after the fact. And we do it basically, in person. Now, that was before the pandemic. Since the pandemic occurred, though, we haven't recorded in person since. So what we've done instead has been, we've moved to more of a remote recording. So I actually gave, John and Elaine a lot of the equipment that I know they can use to get the best possible quality on their end. They record into their PC. I use a USB microphone, which I have right here. I record in my PC, but we use a software called CleanFeed, which if anyone is interested in doing podcasts and they want to have remote guests on, CleanFeed is free. It doesn't cost anything. And the quality you get out of it literally sounds exactly like you're in the room. For example, the first part of that 184 episode on Neil Breen, that was recorded using CleanFeed. We were not in person at all. And you can't really tell the difference that we're not in person. So generally, we record those episodes, I edit them down, and then I'll build the episode artwork. I do two versions, one that's a square version that gets kind of put on, your phone, and then one that's a widescreen version that gets put on social media. And then I run through Libsyn. That's actually our distribution platform. And then through Libsyn, I kind of have all of the different podcasting apps kind of in play: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora. They grow their list of distribution platforms every day. Like, honestly, I think today they announced a new one that services in India. So it all gets kind of funneled from there. And then I might do a shared Facebook post and a Twitter post kind of linking to episodes. I actually started using a service called Chartable, which allows you to create smart links so that, whoever clicks on the link, they can choose what platform they want to use. That's one of the things that kind of get in the way of your audience, is not knowing what platform they're opening on. So some people might have iOS devices, some people might have Android devices, or they might be on the computer and they might want to specify what they're going to use. So using Chartable as kind of our link has helped in getting the episode to the person through whatever means necessary. And then one of the things I've been adding into is the inclusion of video. So we create little video bumpers that have little segments of our episodes and post those on Instagram.
Okay.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Libsyn, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is, to my knowledge, it's like the oldest or the original platform.
It is the oldest and largest podcasting host since 2004. Mm-hmm. Right. And I only know that because they say it every week on their podcast.
Yeah. So to clarify, how does it end up on Spotify or iTunes or these other, or Stitcher? Right. Is that their work or your?
So the way that a podcast works is you actually, when you hit subscribe, let's say I'm on my phone. When I hit subscribe, when I hit subscribe, I'm not actually subscribing to Apple Podcasts or iTunes. I'm actually subscribing to what's called the RSS feed. So the
No, it's not hearing.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. So the RSS feed is what actually you're subscribing to. That includes all the links to the audio files that contain the episodes. What Libsyn does is basically host those audio files. It's a media host. That's in essence what it is. Generally, you want to use a media host. You do not want to use something like GoDaddy or Bluehost to host your podcast, just because the feed is important. It is vital. If that feed breaks, then anyone who's subscribed to that feed will not be able to get your episodes. They will probably lose any information they had on those episodes. So it's very important that that feed is housed in a place that is secure, that is consistently monitored, and that's why you want to use a media host. I've seen people in the past who've said, well, I don't need a media host. I can use, whatever. That's fine, but keep in mind that that media host is designed to handle the traffic that a podcast can get. Imagine how many times you're going to get downloads from a regular website host for your media, and it's going to blow up. even if your show doesn't, if you only get, say, 100 downloads an episode, that's still a lot of requests. So generally, Libsyn handles the RSS feed. And then what I would do is basically create, in essence, what is a blog post that includes the audio, and then hitting publish shoots that from Libsyn through my RSS feed to the various different platforms that I've already set up. So that's kind of on the back end what Libsyn does. And I can even show an example of that back end if you want to look at it.
I'll leave that to you guys. If you want to see it, let us know.
Yeah.
Actually, sure. If you've got it, is it you?
Yeah, I can show you. Yeah. It's on my
okay.
computer.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let me just do.
Nice
I'll do a quick look at it. So, so this right here is Libsyn. Can everyone see that? Can you see that? So this is Libsyn. And up top here, this is basically for our show. So I have down here kind of the individual destinations. It shows me kind of my downloads. Just good thing to note, since the pandemic hit, not a lot of people have been listening to podcasts. That's kind of been a consistent thing across the entire space. And honestly, that's just because not a whole lot of people have been commuting as much. So you can kind of see we had a major spike around, March. Should we go back here? Yeah. Was a little low in March, and then we spiked up again. But this gives me kind of my analytics. Come down here to destinations, you can kind of see these are all the different destinations that my podcast shoots to. The standard Spotify is right here. Libsyn, the actual feed, which this is what gets sent to the various directories. So, for example, Stitcher isn't listed on here, but they pull in from this RSS feed. Spotify is its own separate thing, so you kind of have to set that up. But, I've got the Android app, I've got iHeartRadio, Pandora, Radio Public. WordPress is my own individual website, so that has a player that you can view from there. So the idea really is just that whenever you're creating a podcast, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one platform. You honestly want to be everywhere, just because you don't know where someone's listening from. I've had people who've honestly listened to my podcast entirely from YouTube, because we publish our episodes to YouTube as YouTube videos. So it really kind of, you don't want to hamstring yourself, basically.
Back to when you're doing a recording session, are you do you ever does a conversation run into like a dead end and you start again and then you plan to edit later for content, that kind of thing?
So I actually do not do a whole lot of content editing, and that's something that every podcast kind of approaches it their own way. For me, I look at it in terms of I want this to be as conversational as possible. And I think editing out things, like there are people who literally go to ridiculous proportions and they'll edit out ums and ahs and, everything. And I'm just like, that's so ridiculous, because a podcast is not the same as talk radio. Talk radio, you have to worry about those sort of things, but podcast is supposed to be conversational and intimate. So I leave a lot of that stuff in. And there have been times where we go off on tangents. Now, a lot of times if I'm listening back to the episode, I'm like, John said something that I don't think is going to be good, for the audience, or maybe I said something that I'm like, that I think point might be too far of a stretch, and I could see where there could be issues. Then I'll go in, I'll cut that part. For instance, John made a comment in our John Carpenter episode that his wife Lane literally messaged me a day later and was like, I think you should cut that out because I don't think he knows what he's saying. And it just, kind of negates the point of the conversation. So we'll cut things like that out. If there are times where we get interruptions, so for instance, when we were recording in person, John and Lane have a very large dog that at one time actually snapped one of my microphone cables, bit it in half while we were in the middle of recording. So the recording, I'm hearing this and I'm listening back to it and I'm like, why does it break in the middle of that conversation? And for that, I have to mark it down as what the time code is, and go back in later and just kind of cut that out and smooth it out. But, for those are really the only things I'll cut out. I don't really do a whole lot of content editing. But now quality, like actually improving the quality of the sound, I do those sort of processes, which I think everyone should. Never just take your audio in coming straight out of the recorder. You always have to do something to punch it up, make it sound as crisp and as clean as possible. But aside from that, I really don't do a whole lot of content editing.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'm interested in is a structured podcast, because they take typically the conversational tone. But it's not like a conversation at a party, which will literally, move from one topic to a completely different topic. And so I'm sort of wondering if there's sort of a natural structure. I mean, naturally there's a beginning, and you talk about what you're going to talk about, and then you start talking about it. And, it's going to take tangents and that kind of thing. How do you reach an ending that you feel like is satisfying for your audience?
So we've done this podcast so long that we kind of know when we've extended out our amount of conversation about an episode. And it ends up kind of being generally about an hour, which is perfect. That's exactly where you want to be at. In terms of structure, we've experimented a little bit. We used to do something where we would have kind of a news segment that we would talk about, for the first 10 minutes or so. And, that was great for us. We liked that. But, when I would go back into our numbers and I'd actually look at the consumption rate, one of the things that Apple Podcasts has come up with now is the ability to actually look and see when people kind of skip ahead and cut through that to get to the actual review. We found that, that section was not really listened to a whole lot. And it makes sense. The title of the episode is not that news segment. It's, I'm talking about Neil Breen movies. I'm talking about Fateful Findings or any of these things. That's what people are listening to for. So we eliminated that, and now we kind of keep our kind of beginning banter down to like 5 minutes, and then we jump into the review. And that works out fine. We've also experimented with, because of the fact that we're part of the Epicast network, of putting in kind of like show bumpers, for other shows in the network. And that's fine. But again, it comes down to, are people listening to that? If they're not listening to it, then there's really no need to put that in. You really want to think about, not just what you want as the podcast producer, but you really want to think about what is the audience going to listen to, because ultimately they're the ones who are, one, if you're doing this for monetization purposes, they're the ones who are going to pay you. Or if you're just doing this for fun, they're the ones who are going to follow you, which I think, depending on what your end goals are, that's where your mind should be at.
Tell us a little bit about that as far as following the numbers of listeners, if it ever got to the point where you feel like you could sell ads, that kind of thing, the business side.
Yeah. So right now, and we've always talked about monetizing the podcast. The truth of the matter is that podcasting still has yet to kind of crack the monetization code. A lot of people with very large, wallets will tell you, oh yeah, we can throw a bunch of ad revenue at podcasts and we're going to get all these customers. The truth is that it's still relatively new. It's still a new medium. It's not like TV, which, think about it, TV, it first came out in the, for monetization purposes, the late 40s. And advertisements in that were literally just, the host of whatever talk show stopping for 5 seconds or 30 seconds and talking about a product, and that kind of is where we're at right now, where the best ads, the ones that are actually giving return, are when the host is actually stopping the content and reading the ad, just like you would in that early land of television. So, but the point is just no one really knows if that is working, if that is actually causing the kind of seismic change that would really, cause podcasting to get to the level that you see with, say, YouTube. For me, though, I said at the top of this discussion that podcasting is not going to make you rich. And aside from Joe Rogan, that's true. People do podcasts who go into it thinking I'm going to make money, you're going to be disappointed. So for me, it's more or less about creating an audience. I'm not really doing this to make money. If I did anything, it would be something like a Patreon or maybe even affiliate marketing, which those sorts of things, they're not kind of worrying about, okay, am I going to get a sponsor to sponsor my show? Am I now beholden to that sponsor if, my content doesn't fit what the sponsor views, which a lot of YouTube channels have had to deal with that, have had kind of the backlash of that currently. For me, I understand that my content is not meant for children. I would never say it is. That's why I say it's explicit. So, for me, I'm fine with having something like a passive type of income generation, which maybe just covers the hosting costs. That's fine. If it made more, great. That's not my goal. My goal is giving my audience the best content I can create, and growing that. I want to see growth. I want to see it spread, because one, that increases my influence as someone who talks about movies. It helps me as a filmmaker. If down the line I make a short film, I make a feature film, I want to get that information out to, say, my audience. But in terms of just making money off the spot, it's not designed for that.
One of the things that I like about podcasting is that it's a pretty easy access or easy entry medium, which potentially, you could potentially, be like-minded people. So, what are the actual hard expenses that you are incurred as far as on the hosting costs?
Yeah.
Kind of thing?
Yeah. So Libsyn has a couple different plans, which that I'd say is the main cost, is that media host. You can't run a podcast without a media host. You have to have that. I would not use Anchor. I really wouldn't. I know that some people use Anchor, but I mentioned earlier in our talk about the importance of controlling that RSS feed. Anchor, the way it's set up is you do not control that RSS feed. Anchor controls it. So Anchor is the one who is submitting it to Apple Podcasts. Anchor is the one who is submitting it to any other places. And Anchor is the one who could then look at, say, the analytics of that RSS feed and see if it's performing or not. Because I own my RSS feed, because I purchased through Libsyn, which for me it's about $20 a month, which some people might say that's an expensive hobby if you map it out over 12 months, and it is. And that's why I say, for me, covering those hosting costs, that would be great. But with Libsyn for $20 a month, I get like 400 megabytes of space per month, and that could basically encompass about 4 episodes with some extra and change. And on top of that, I get a website created. Now, I don't use their website. I actually bought a website through, I'm using another I'm using another web host now. I've gone through like 3 different web hosts since I've had the podcast. But there's those costs that are associated with it that are paid out once a year. And that's just because I wanted to have extra things on my website that were not included in just the Libsyn page. But if you're just starting out, that Libsyn website that they give you is perfect. You don't need really anything else. Aside from that, hardware expenses, really, those are like one-time purchases. And truthfully, the type of mic that I'm using today is an ATR 2100 from Audio-Technica. This retails for like $40. So if you want to up the scale of your podcast, buy some decent headphones, buy a nice microphone that's USB. If you want to go into your computer, you're just starting out. I mentioned not using your cell phone for this sort of thing, but truthfully, if you're just getting started and really just trying to get a handle on the content, which I'd say the content is probably more important to some degree than the quality. The quality is what's going to separate you. It will kind of get you into the pack, more or less. But the content, how strong your content is, how much it grabs the audience. That is ultimately what is going to make you rise amongst everybody else who's doing the same similar show. Me, I know I picked a topic that there are a lot of movie podcasts out there. I try to, apply my niche in a way, even though I know it's a wide niche. But I wanted to kind of separate myself out a little bit from it. But that's the other thing too, is that it kind of doesn't go to cost, but if you are planning to do podcasting, niche down as much as possible,
That's a good point. Yeah. We've been talking about the podcast. I wonder if you can play us another clip. I'd actually suggested that you maybe play the end of a podcast.
Oh yeah, I have the end.
That. Okay.
Yeah. I can play that.
All right.
Let me go to one. Okay. All right. So this is the ending from my most recent one. As I said, I'm sorry if there's any swearing in it. I don't think there is though. But I'll.
John, where can I find you at on the Twitter machine?
I am part of all technology. The Unreal J Wolves.
Lane?
You can find me at I Ruptured My Brain at LA_Croft.
And you can find me at Techno Jesus Zombie God Alien. Or you can find me at
is that why that was taken? You got it first?
Yeah, I was the first. I got it first. You can find me at Brian Cottington. We're on the Psycho Show page. Be sure to like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Psycho Show. You can also find us on the Epicast Network at epicastnetwork.com. If you have a favorite movie or question you want to throw away, or you too want to talk to us because you're Neil Breen and you're tired of us trashing your films and you want to come on the show,
dude,
and stand up for yourself, come on the show, buddy. You can contact us at cinemapsychoshow.com.
Fabulous.
And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and iTunes, and we will see you next time.
Oh, man, I can't believe Neil Breen sold me this dilapidated money pit. Damn you, Neil.
Nice. Very nice.
Thank you. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Neil Breen is a real estate agent in Las Vegas, which is why John said that. Yeah, so that type of content though, like we pretty much have a script, or at least I have a script of what I'm saying at the end of every episode. What I would suggest, and this is something that I don't do because I've been doing this for 184 episodes and I just can't see reasonably a way of doing it, is actually repeating that. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram before you even get into the content. Just because there are a lot of times people, they don't stay for the whole thing. So having it in the beginning is an important thing to do, an important skill to kind of get into. I would even say if you want to do kind of like a preamble recording before you even go into the opening theme, that works too. But I know that's something that I've still have yet to do. So you can still learn new things about podcasting even 184 episodes in.
Yeah, I think the only thing like that, if I had a link to click on, I might click on it.
Well, that's the thing. We have show notes.
Is reciting this kind of thing, it's just not going to work. Yeah.
Well, that's the importance too of the other side of it is show notes. So, if you look at my show notes for an episode, they are very exhaustive. They have links to our everything that I mentioned there, including personal Twitter accounts, all there. Just now, whether people go to that, it depends. But yeah, that's something that you want to do is not only say it, but also link in the show notes for people to click on.
I promised that I'd leave some time for the students and attendees to talk to Brian.
Sure.
I can't actually see if any chat questions came in, but maybe Paul, you can.
Yeah, they come directly to me. So we did have one, but Brian, I think you did touch upon it because the question was about monetizing podcasts and if you had any suggestions for if you were looking to do that, if you had any maybe ideas of how to go about doing that with sponsors, or even I think this is from Scott, I should mention, that if there might even be like a subscription model that you could follow or something like that.
Yeah. So generally I would say that, I mentioned that, podcasting really should be kind of everywhere. And subscription models, that's something that some people have done. I wouldn't apply that, though, to your whole entire show. What I would do is something like a Patreon, which that kind of is like a subscription type thing, where you pay once a month. And instead of getting the entire show, maybe what you do is you create kind of extra content. So, for example, maybe you're recording this interview with, I don't know, a great director. Maybe you get, Scorsese. Okay, maybe Scorsese gets on your show, and you interview him. And you know that you want to keep your main show to maybe about an hour, just because that's however much. But if you know Martin Scorsese talks a lot. So there's a good chance that, you've got a lot of extra content. So that extra content, instead of just being kind of placed out on Facebook and Twitter for free, could be something that you put behind a paywall like Patreon, where you kind of drip that and you have, hey, Martin Scorsese extended interview, you pay, I don't know, $10 a month, and you get access to that. Those sorts of extra content, premium content is what they're actually called in the space. That's a way that you can monetize. The only downside of it, honestly, is the time that it takes. If you do it once in a while, eventually your patrons are going to say, I'm not spending $10 a month. I could spend it on something else and leave you. So it's one of those things that if you're going to commit to doing something like a Patreon, you really have to have extra content produced all the time. And it doesn't have to be extra audio. It could be, maybe posts or maybe written reviews or pictures, things that would interest your audience beyond just your regular podcast. But just, you got to make sure that you have the time for it. That's why I say, finding some passive means, at least if you're starting out, is a way to go. So if you look at something like affiliate marketing, or even kind of like a tip jar, like a PayPal tip jar. Those are ways that you can offset the costs.
On that topic, I think when people think about monetizing podcasts, they think about direct income generation. But you actually touched on something, and I can give another example of this, that podcasts are actually valuable for promotion. Yes. In other words, like I know a woman who's in real estate, and she has a podcast that just talks about real estate, and she talks about other agents and that kind of thing, and it brings attention to her business. So there's no direct and traceable connection, but it's got a small regular audience, and actually it probably does at least it's like advertising or promotion.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I've seen that a lot with people who are trying to sell their services. So you mentioned, real estate, that's something is just trying to separate yourself out. If you don't have the budget to do direct mail ads, if you don't have the budget to do, video promotion, then podcasting is a very cheap way of getting to people who may be interested in your services. The thing is that we like to think that video is kind of the king, and it is, but here's the thing. How many times did you actually pay attention to the commercials that play on TV? Not a whole lot. If you're tuned in through your audio and you're only looking at audio, hearing audio, you're paying more attention to that because you don't have the visual stimuli, so really I'd say, depends on your business model, but, podcasting can be an income generation for another business, not based on the podcast alone. That's kind of when I say there's no money in podcasting. I mean it more from that aspect.
So that actually kind of segues pretty perfectly into a question I was hoping to ask. I'm not necessarily a podcaster myself, but I'm shocked to hear you say that it's still kind of like a new art form. And even for someone, say, who just wants to do a podcast for fun or has something that they want to throw out there, what do you suggest, or how do you necessarily promote your own podcast? Like, not even for the business side of things, like we were just talking about, but like you want to reach a broader audience. How do you guys go about that?
So there's a couple different ways, and honestly, everyone who tackles promotion, they do it in their own way. For me, I primarily use Facebook, and I'm old in that regard when most people are using Instagram and not even Twitter. But I wanted us to kind of be in every platform if possible. That was when I first started, though, and honestly, I would say that's the wrong way to go now. What I tell my students and what I tell anyone who's looking to get into podcasting is promote on the platform that you use the most. So if you are familiar with Instagram, if you use Instagram on a daily basis, then only use Instagram. Don't look at Twitter. And don't look at Facebook if you don't use them, because trying to adapt what you already use on a daily basis to a new platform is tough. For me, what I tend to do is I'll put out an episode and I'll put out a Twitter post with a link to it. I'll usually tag it at the top. And then for Instagram, I'll usually put, either GIFs or, Spotify, Instagram stories, which you can click on and directly sends you to Spotify. So there's ways of getting people to the show. The other way too, and this is something that I don't have a whole lot of experience with, and honestly have been trying to crack the code on, is using email marketing. So email marketing is another way that you can, get people to sign up for your show without actually getting them to subscribe, because one of the things that a lot of podcasters struggle with is not knowing the number of subscribers they have. There's no hard and fast way of knowing that number. You can look and see who downloads it, but that doesn't mean who's subscribed to it. So that's why using something like an email list to get dedicated emails and then push out newsletters that maybe include like, hey, this is what's going on. This is where we're doing a live podcast event, and this is the newest episode. That's a way that you can kind of market your shows. I haven't done a whole lot of it because obviously, as I mentioned, with producing the show, that takes up a lot of time. But I would say if you're going out that route, look at that as a way, because it doesn't cost a whole lot. You can get MailChimp account for free. And, that is kind of give you a number that you can associate with how many people are maybe listening to your show.
Awesome. Yeah. A little behind the scenes look. Well, Brian and Will, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and Will for getting Brian to come on and share his experience and kind of give us a little super behind the scenes tour. It's much appreciated. Folks, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm sure we'll be hanging around for a couple more minutes, but if not, thank you again for joining us, tuning in, and Will finishes up the third and final portion of his podcasting series next week, same time, Wednesday at 2. And then our final week, if we can believe it already, of the summer sessions is the last week in July, where we'll be touching on photographic essay in the digital content series. So thank you all so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. See you, Paul. See you guys.
Thank you.